Good afternoon and welcome to the Coinbase Institutional Markets Call. It is the 21st of May 2024, around about midday in New York City. Now, we have got a cracking call, which is really going to be a lot about the ETH ETF, what to look out for, what's happened in the last 24 hours, both from a price movement perspective, leverage, funding rates, and then also kind of what to look out for in the coming week. DH, David Hahn, credit to you guys. You're always very balanced, and you've not said we're definitely going to get an ETF approval, but you've certainly been more constructive than many others in the market about why we might see a more positive outcome. Well played. It must have been tough to be so contrarian for a period of time, but I'm sure when you saw that tweet and the market reaction, you were somewhat vindicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, it was always a matter of the SEC has left the door open for them to vote either way. And I think that the market was pricing it as if they had shut the door on any approval. So I think it's good to see, especially with the political tailwinds now, that the winds have shifted in the other direction.
Yeah, well, a lot more to discuss, and these things can always turn around. But we want to make sure that we're balanced, and we will be through the call. But we'll kind of offer both sides and a lot more to run through. But our agenda for today is as follows. Obviously, ETF is going to be the big one, an update around everything that's important to know there. We'll also cover some other news and also upcoming catalysts, and we'll finish with a small segment on the on-chain side of things at the end. If you are watching on YouTube, please scan the QR code to access the David's fantastic research. If you are listening on one of the podcast platforms, all that information will be in your show notes. And no matter where you're listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe so everyone else can understand what is going on in crypto and more people can hear from us. So into the show, and what an eventful 24 hours it has been. So for those watching on your screen now, you're going to see the tweet that got everything going. Eric Balchunas, one of the Bloomberg ETF specialists, published a tweet saying, update, James Cipher, and I are increasing our odds of the spot Ether ETF approval up to 75% from 25%. Hearing chatter this afternoon from the SEC, they could be doing a 180. That sent the whole market spiraling higher. ETH up over 20% since then. Lido up 30%, Uniswap and ARB up 20%, AVAX up 10%. Even some of the meme coins got to move higher as well, with Bonk up 30% and Floki and Doge up 10%. We're also seeing Ether futures open interest hitting a record 14 billion on centralized exchanges, and Polymarket have the odds at 70%, having been trading in around the 9-10% region prior to that tweet. So, David Duong, DD, I want to bring you in here. Let's kind of just like level set a little bit. Now, obviously, the market's gone bananas off the back of that tweet, but let's actually dig into the details now. What actually needs to happen for this to go live? We obviously had the BTC ETF at the start of the year, but a lot has happened since then. So I think it'd be good to have a quick reminder of what that process looks like.
Yeah, so for anyone who's not familiar, there are two parts to the approval process. Exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ need to file a rule change in a 19B4 filing to actually introduce new products on their platform. That is what is under discussion right now. The idea that the SEC actually asked these exchanges to actually file these rule changes. So those filings have a deadline that extend up to 240 days, and the one coming up is May 23rd. But separately, you also have the S1 registration statements from the ETF issuers themselves, and that explains how the funds are going to be managed, how it intends to track the performance of an asset or assets, in this case, how it's going to track the performance of ETH. And technically, though, there's no actual deadline for approving these S1 documents. But I would say that most people have been bearish on an approval, primarily because they thought there was no visible progress from the SEC asking for updates on these filings, which we previously argued didn't make much sense because we already saw that they had the spot Bitcoin ETF applications in the template. So just a lot of the issues about custody fees, they already were resolved. So they weren't being asked to rehash these things. And the second thing is the big question of whether the SEC could actually argue that ETH is a security, which we previously argued they wouldn't do because that would actually affect their previous decisions to approve ETH futures ETFs, also their acceptance of the CFTC's previous decision to approve ETH futures as a standard rather than securities future.
Perfect. And I have to say, kind of a round of applause to Team David's at Coinbase. You guys have never said we're going to see an ETH ETF approval, but you have been balanced in your opinion as to kind of how we might potentially get there and how the kind of the process follows. So well played. There were certainly a number of client calls where you were contrarian versus what others were thinking, and that's always a tough place to be. So well done for doing that. Now, I guess into the nuts and bolts, all the BTC ETFs were approved on the same day. Can we expect that this time around with Ethereum?
That's a good question, because we have these key deadlines on May 23rd, May 24th, but also besides VanEck and ARC21 shares, which are the first two to come up, you also have hashtags coming up on May 30th, and then there's a bit of a gap, and then some of the final deadlines actually culminate around the July and August kind of period. I think the question is, why did the SEC decide to approve all the spot Bitcoin ETF applications at once? And to be honest, I don't think there was a perfectly clear ruling about that. We saw that there was a response to the court decision that happened last year that kind of forced the SEC's hand to kind of approve those spot Bitcoin ETFs. And we also got this comment from Commissioner Ueda, which said that the actual motivation for accelerating, quote unquote, the approval is to avoid a first mover advantage, so that there's the first spot Bitcoin ETPs to market don't acquire the lion's share of investor assets. So I think that it's very possible the SEC thought that approving them all at once was the measured approach to take. But I think the question for me is, why wouldn't the SEC approve all the spot ETH ETF applications at the same time? And the question could be, or the answer rather, could be that the SEC had maybe regulatory concerns around market integrity issues, if they were worried about custodial arrangements, for example, or adequate market surveillance mechanisms, like if they were worried that they just weren't in place. But keep in mind, too, that we've seen a lot of political pressure on the SEC. This actually happened as recently as March. There was a letter from Senators LaFonza Butler of California, Jack Reed from Rhode Island, that actually asked the SEC to limit future crypto ETF applications. I think that letter has since been overshadowed by the bipartisan support we've seen for the repeal of SAB 121. Plus, we've now got this upcoming Fit 21 Act vote that would be huge. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I think that that's something important to kind of keep in mind, too, when they're kind of considering the decisions around whether to approve all of this at once.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And we'll certainly come to Sub 21 a little bit later on. And David, staking, this is something that has been taken out of some of the applications. We're seeing Lido rally up 30%. It had been a real laggard in the last few weeks. How should we think about staking, whether it's now or in the future?
Yeah, so we've seen that staking is a part of ETFs in other places. So Europe, for example, famously already does have ETH ETFs that include staking. So I think there's been some pushback that, practically speaking, it's very difficult to do. Well, no, we have a template for it in other places. So we know that it can be done. But I think that from a political perspective, it's not seen very kindly inside the US. So I think that the likelihood of seeing staking as part of an ETF, at least in the near term, is very unlikely. And that's probably why you're seeing ARC21, Fidelity actually remove staking from their applications. So I would say that probably, for the near term, it's only there to be removed. But probably in the future, I think that it will be a fight that a lot of these issuers are going to want to have, because this is one of the things that would distinguish ETH ETFs from Bitcoin ETFs.
Now, Greg, we'd love to bring you in here and just talk about the market reaction. We're obviously seeing a lot of strength in meme coins and Ethereum, clearly anything connected to Ethereum, and we're also seeing a bit of weakness or kind of stagnation almost in Solana, suggesting that people are rotating out of Sol into ETH to kind of capture these moves higher, especially as kind of funding rates blow out as well. So how are you thinking about this from a market perspective?
Yeah, so yesterday I think took nearly everybody by surprise. We've had a lot of calls with clients of all different types. And really the expectation was, people were pricing a 0% chance that these ETFs get approved. And because of that, ETH was very under-owned. So when we saw this news, obviously everybody reacted very quickly. And it was one of the first days in a long time when we had, sizable ETH buying on the desk. And additionally, you can see that in the perp markets, open interest expanded by almost $3 billion. Perp funding rates went out to, let me just check here, got as wide as 35%. So people added a lot of length in a very short period of time. And yeah, like you said, we saw some rotations, out of other tokens, Solana being one of them, to fund these trades. Because between, now and, a potential approval, people want to have a decent sized position on here.
Perfect. So same kind of question that we asked David earlier on. So the market's gone crazy. You've broken down that from like a funding rate perspective. Obviously, there are a ton of liquidations. We're seeing rotations. But how do we, what's the other side of this? Like, how have maybe some of the other ETH products traded, ETH futures in Hong Kong or in the US, ETH ETF in Hong Kong? Like, how have those traded? And is that something we can look at for a potential read across to any demand if we do see an approval?
Yeah, it's a good point you bring up, and it's something I think people need to be pretty careful of. It's not likely that ETH will be a perfect analog to Bitcoin. And the reason I say that is, we had a Bitcoin futures ETF, that got, a significant amount of assets in a very short period of time. We then got ETH futures ETFs. Now it was a different part of the cycle, but those did not get the reception that some may have hoped for. Likewise, in Hong Kong, like you said, we can look there, and that's a pretty good experiment we can take a look at, because there they had a Bitcoin spot ETF and a spot Ethereum ETF launched simultaneously. And what we see is that ETH ETFs got about a little less than 20% of the assets as Bitcoin did. So, it's still an open question as to what the investor appetite will be for these products. And, on top of that, we can't forget the price action that we did see after the launch of the Bitcoin ETFs here in the US, where it really was a sell the news event. So, again, I think that's why you're seeing people get long into this event. What happens on a potential launch date and thereafter, I think, is a little harder to gauge.
Interesting. So, and to just remind us how Bitcoin did trade post the approval and then day one of trading, what were the kind of dynamics of Bitcoin in that period?
Yeah, so we traded up into the approval, and we saw a lot of length in the futures contracts, and then basically that was the top for the next, I think, few weeks. We saw basis collapse pretty aggressively, and that took spot down quite a bit. Now, we don't know that it would happen here as well, but it is something that's fresh in traders' minds. So it wouldn't surprise me if people manage risk a little tighter around this.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. David Hahn, we'd love to bring you in here. We spoke about at the top of the show with David Duong about Sub 21 and also the FIT Act as well. I guess there have been some inextricable connections, it feels like, with what's going on in the political side of things, with potentially what's going on with other decisions. So maybe can you just kind of run us through how you're thinking about that, and maybe a quick overview of SAB 121 and the FIT Act as well?
Yes, certainly, Ben. The SAB 121 repeal, just for context, the SAB 121 is the Special Accounting Bulletin 121. It's a guidance issued by the SEC whereby banks, if they custody any crypto, need to hold cash against all the assets they custody, because the crypto that they custody would be considered a liability on their balance sheet. What this means is that if a bank wanted to, say, custody $1 billion worth of crypto, they need to actually hold $1 billion worth of cash just to offset that liability on their balance sheet. Now, this makes it prohibitively expensive for banks to do any sort of custodyship and really engage in any meaningful actions in this industry because of the prohibitive costs, even if it's not totally banned. So that's just a pretty important decision there. Now, the House and the Senate repeal votes for this. The House actually voted in support of this, in support of repealing the SAB 121 last Friday in a bipartisan vote. Last Friday in a bipartisan vote. More recently, this previous Friday, the SAB 121 was repealed in the Senate with also a bipartisan vote, where even the leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, voted across party lines in support of this bill. Now, the White House previously did say that they would veto this bill and this repeal of SAB 121 if it came to their desk. However, that's not necessarily guaranteed. Previously, with the DC crime bill, the White House also said they would veto that bill if it came to their desk, but with bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate for that bill, the White House actually reversed the decision and passed that bill. So we may see something similar with the SAB 121 repeal. Hopefully we do. So it's not set in stone, but Biden has until next Tuesday, May 28th, to come to a decision on this vote.
Perfect. And then the FIT Act House vote. What is the kind of the background to that, the TLDR?
Yeah, certainly. So the FIT Act, which is the Financial Innovation Technology Act for the 21st century, is a really important piece of legislation for the crypto industry. It really delineates the separations of powers between the CFTC and the SEC when it comes to digital assets. It creates rulings around what counts as like decentralization, what counts as a digital asset broker, et cetera. There's a lot of rulings and a lot of clarity when it comes to the digital asset space, which we've been asking for in the US. This act recently made it out of the House Financial Services and Agriculture Committees with bipartisan support. It is going to be up for a vote in the US House this week. Now, obviously, the wording might change when it makes it to the Senate. So there's a lot of attention around here as well. And given how much strength and bipartisan support there has been for repealing the SAB 121, we may see something similar with the FIT Act as well, although that's still very much to be determined.
Is it me, or do we need to get some better creativity when it comes for picking names? I mean, actually, I'm not very good at it, so I shouldn't throw stones there. But interesting. So we've got those two things that are clearly kind of very important for the industry more broadly, and it seems to be, to your point, there's some kind of tailwinds. Now, the next thing I want to run through is Prometheum, who soft launched some ETH services. Now, there has been some controversy around Prometheum within the industry in the past, but DH would love to kind of hear your perspective around the moves that they've made just before a potential approval.
Yeah, this has been really interesting. So actually yesterday on May 20th, Prometheum soft launched ETH services. Now, Prometheum stated that, or the idea is that the assets that Prometheum custodies and serves are all digital securities registered under the SEC. So the timing of this move, some were interpreting it as a early soft rejection signal by the SEC. Obviously, with the news about the 19B4 accelerated filings from the exchanges, we think that the SEC still has room to go either way with the decision. But this is more of a countersign to all the optimistic narratives around the ETH ETFs being approved. So there's definitely, we still think the SEC has space to go either way in this direction, although we definitely lean towards the optimistic standpoint, given the recent news in the past few days.
Yeah, it's certainly been eventful, and again, well done for kind of sticking to your guns on that one prior to these tweets. Now, DD, would love to kind of get your perspective. It feels like crypto is actually important or becoming important within this next election cycle, and there are some large PACs funded by folks within the industry. Is it me, or is it actually potentially going to be a kind of a key part of maybe Biden or Trump's narrative going into November?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like two things. Number one, I think the market was looking for a catalyst, and I think this was a big one in the absence of any other market catalyst. And so I think that this is why we're probably so focused on it at the moment. But you're right. We've also seen surveys kind of coming out from some pretty large organizations suggesting that this is becoming a political issue in some of the battleground states in the U.S. And the fact that, for example, Biden jumped so quickly to actually suggest he could potentially veto, the SAB 121 repeal actually seems to kind of suggest that view has some credence in here. Now, which way it's swaying, I think it's kind of interesting because we've now gotten kind of a layout of different politicians and their particular views with regards to cryptocurrencies. I'm wondering now that you're seeing that there's more bipartisan support out there, whether that could actually potentially affect some of the pre-existing views that are currently here for the campaign trail.
Yeah, I mean, I guess 60 million plus Americans hold crypto, and many of those are young voters. So maybe it is becoming an issue. And now I guess like open question to the floor here. Actually, no, let's start with you, Greg. Let's say we see we don't see the approval on the 23rd. Like, is it just reverse engines back to where we were, or do we kind of hold a slightly higher level, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ben. If we don't get positive news later this week, we'll obviously see weakness in ETH. Whether it goes back to where we came from, just below $3,000, or even lower, will really depend on why the applications are disapproved. So there's still a lot more details we need to learn here.
Yeah, interestingly, I know there's been a lot of talk about ETH being rejected on the grounds of security. If the FIT Act gets passed in the U.S. House in its current language and also makes it to the Senate, the FIT Act actually has language to define certain decentralized systems as a digital commodity and change some of the wordings even in the Commodity Exchange Act. So this would actually remove ETH and other sufficiently decentralized systems out of the purview of the SEC and into the CFTC. So it's unclear some of the motivations and how this might change in the coming months if the FIT Act does pass the House and the Senate and gets approved into legislation. So there's this other background to consider when it comes to timings and possible reversals of a rejection, depending on the reason for a rejection.
Perfect. And what's the timeline for the FIT Act House vote?
The vote is this week. So it will come out either on Wednesday, late end of day, or maybe on Thursday. We'll see the bill either pass or get rejected in the House. And then the Senate is still obviously TBD.
Wow, so it's a busy week, isn't it? So we've got that Wednesday, Thursday this week. We've got until the 28th of May for Biden to repeal SAB 121. And then we've got 23rd for the ETF approvals. That's a lot. That's pretty busy. Is it? What is there anything missing there?
I think those are the big headlines. So those are the three big pieces of news. But yeah, definitely a really legislatively heavy week for crypto. A lot of regulatory impetuses that might change, at least in the near term, some of the visibility and clarity around this industry, particularly within the U.S. Yeah,
I feel like we've gone from, like, prior to kind of yesterday's move, we've gone from not a ton of kind of market moving crypto related catalysts to like a lot in a very short period of time. Wow. All right. Well, thank you, guys. Thank you for taking us through that. And obviously, we'll keep an eye on the markets and the news and come back to you with more when we have more information. Now, moving on to, I guess, more kind of on-chain items here. Uniswap Labs and Across have produced a new standard for cross-chain. I'm presuming execution and communication, just general cross-chain functionality. Can you run us through that quickly?
Yes, certainly. Uniswap Labs and Across, they came out with a new proposal called ERC-7683. So a lot of numbers. The really important thing here is it's a new standard for signaling cross-chain intents. So I know there's been a lot of chatter around, how do you deal with cross-chain stuff between rollups, etc. So what this does is it creates a new cross-chain order structure, as well as a new smart settlement contract, smart contract interface that allows you to potentially create a message and have someone else go ahead and execute these intents across chain for you. So this intent-based architecture is something we've seen growing in increasing importance, particularly from Uniswap. Their Uniswap X intent-based swapping features, etc. And I think this is pretty important because it kind of shows another pathway for evolutions of cross-chain messaging in the short term, even as there's a lot of different bridging competition protocols that users probably don't really understand very well. This will allow it to evolve into some sort of an intent-based architecture where users can say, hey, I want to do something across chain, and someone else can go ahead and fulfill these orders. So maybe this will change some of the UX across different, at least EVM compatible chains, because it is a ERC comment.
So this wouldn't allow Uniswap to work on Solana, for example, or other monolithic chains?
Theoretically, it could help with cross-chain intents across, say, for example, the Neon EVM on Solana, but you wouldn't be able to go from something that's, as far as I can tell, not an EVM chain into a non-EVM chain. So this is mainly between EVM stuff because it is an ERC comment, so it's specific to things that are Ethereum compatible.
Got it. Okay, but it helps grow the TAM for Uniswap and others that might utilize this protocol in the future.
Yeah, I think the big key here is just this. It's a new avenue towards cross-chain communications and how that might evolve for the user experience going forward.
Got it. Okay, cool. And then what else has been going on, David, that you've been keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think the second big thing that's also worth keeping an eye on is Optimism. They recently announced that they wanted to launch their fraud proofs on mainnet. This is a big deal. This is launching them from a stage 0 rollup, which is like multi-sig trust assumptions, no fault proofs, into potentially a stage 1 rollup, where there's the way for people to challenge the fraud proofs that they're posting to the L1. This can also be adopted by other chains. So this is the vote, obviously, right now is for OP chain, but it can be adopted by other chains using the OP stack, of which there are many, including our own base chain as well, which is built on the OP stack. Arbitrum already has fault proofs, but it's good to see this technology expanding across chains. And I think that one pattern that we've seen is that as rollups become more and more secure, we actually see more and more bridged ETH, more and more liquidity onto these rollups as people get more comfortable with the security trust assumptions on these chains. So, for example, today we have around 3.5 million ETH bridged to rollups in their across chains. Right, 1 year ago it was only around 1.5. So we've seen more than double the amount of ETH bridged to rollups in the past year, and this hasn't been slowing down. It's been essentially linear up and to the right for more than a year and a half now. So definitely cool to see the scalability roadmap for Ethereum kind of be realized.
Excellent. Are there any kind of on-chain applications that are seeing a ton of traction at the moment? Obviously, we've had periods where Friendtech has gone crazy, and obviously Filecaster continues to grow. Is there anything that you've been playing with that you find interesting that we can all have a play with?
There's a lot of things. Nothing that I would say is super ready for a billion users to be onboarded. One thing that I thought was pretty interesting was there's this little. It's not exactly a game, but there's a product on Base. It's called like World PvP, which is there's different tokens for different countries, and you can buy different tokens. And if the country's token goes up, then every week you get a vote, and you get to essentially nuke another country and take their liquidity into your country. So it's been pretty interesting to see those dynamics. And there's other things like you can set different country flags for different countries. So at one point, I believe America had the flag of India on it. So it's just been fun. But of course, this is still a very niche segment of the market.
It sounds like Risk, kind of like an on-chain version of Risk, where you're kind of taking control of different lands and interesting. David, Greg, anything you guys have been playing with that you found interesting? Or
I'm still playing around with Polymarket. I think it's been a lot of fun to play with, and I think I mentioned on the last call. It's one of the first crypto applications that doesn't seem like a crypto application when you go to its site. You wouldn't even know it is until you have to connect your wallet. So pretty cool in my book.
How are you, David? Anything you're looking at?
No, sorry, Ben. I'm gonna plead the fifth on this as well. I haven't had the time to actually been playing with anything, but have just been kind of watching. I think the space develop. I think over the last few weeks, I think kind of interesting to see. Like Lens launching on ZK Sync, for example. I think that's been kind of interesting. Other news like Arweave flipping Filecoin. I think that was kind of worth kind of pointing out. But other than that, nothing that I've personally been playing with.
Yeah, Arweave and Filecoin, that's an interesting one. Can you just kind of do a quick explainer of what they both do and why that's important?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ben. So I would say that Filecoin and Arweave are both the two big names inside of the centralized storage space. But I think they've both taken on some added significance given the intersection between AI and crypto. So there's this view inside the industry that actually AI could more and more utilize decentralized storage solutions as a way to kind of store the data securely, in a cost-effective kind of way. And I think it kind of flew under the radar, but generally, this race has been Filecoin's to win, and I think it's very interesting now to see that the market cap of Arweave has actually flipped the market cap of Filecoin. I'm not sure what it actually says about the future of data sharing and collaboration and all this stuff, but I think it's just a very interesting tidbit to notice.
Yeah, that makes ton of sense. Yeah, Filecoin certainly an OG and Arweave are kind of a 21 cycle company, but good to see they're both trucking at it. One company that presented when I was at Radici a couple of weeks ago was a company called Baxis that was putting wine and whiskey into putting it on chain, which was kind of interesting for those that are lovers of those. It allows you to trade it more easily, and you then can be set at the provenance. So anyway, I think we'll see more of these spinning up, which is great. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining. That is a wrap. Thank you so much to all the Coinbase team, both on camera and behind the camera. And thank you all for joining us. We have another really, really busy week to keep an eye on the news headlines coming out and what that means for the market. And we'll be back next week to give you an update on what it all means and what's happened in the last 7 days. Thank you for joining. Have a great week. Good luck out there.